Welcome to A Window on SAHMRI, where we take you inside South Australia's independent not-for-profit health and medical research institute. Each episode, we get to know the people driving our life-changing research, getting into what motivates them personally and how their work is delivering a brighter, healthier future for all.
Julian, coming out of high school, what made you want to study a Bachelor of Medical Science?
I actually didn't to start off.
Right.
I was actually all geared up to do engineering, and then had a last minute sort of decision that wasn't really what I wanted to do.
Okay, because they're pretty different.
Yeah. I was actually better at physics and maths than I was biology in high school, but I just decided it wasn't for me.
What was behind that decision? Was this an 11th hour, the night before pressing the button type thing?
Literally, that was it. I sort of chose medical science first as a bit of a place filler, trying to work out exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something health related or
So
science
more
related.
deciding that you didn't want to be an engineer rather than
Correct.
you definitely wanted to be a scientist?
Yes. And then sort of like it paving the way into a career into science and following it was more taking up placements in lab research. And I really loved the work, loved the atmosphere, loved solving problems. So that really shaped my trajectory and solidified my choice to follow research.
So what were some of your first experiences in the lab that sparked an interest?
I think it's a combination of just the actual act of getting thrown into a problem and having all these tools at your disposal and then trying to think critically on how to solve these problems. And it's very gratifying when you finally do. And I think some of those successes early on, obviously a lot of failures on the way, but things like that really, really shaped me wanting to pursue this.
So when you were moving into science and still sort of deciding what way you wanted to go, was there a period of doubt and things being up and down and not knowing where it was going to go? Or after you decided not to do engineering, were you sure that you'd made the right decision?
I was pretty sure I'd made the right decision. I have a huge interest, or I developed an interest a bit more in just basic cellular biology and molecular biology. And then from there, once you're working on something that you genuinely enjoy, it really just, put me in the right direction. And it was sort of the next thing for me was I was from doing placements in the lab, like I knew I wanted to be a researcher.
So for you, is it about understanding how the body works on a more intricate level? That's where the interest comes from?
Absolutely. I've always had an interest in trying to understand how things work, the mechanism behind essentially life. So research in cell biology has really been the point of where I'm mostly interested in, and trying to understand how our cells behave and shape what we are.
And you're curious and a problem solver, and you want to be able to fix a puzzle, but you wanted to do it in humans rather than in things.
Yes.
So it seems like that it would be actually quite transferable going from an interest in something like engineering to being a scientist in some ways, in terms of having a problem in front of you and having to work through it, but then, potentially having it mean even more because you might be saving lives or helping people live healthier, longer lives.
Correct. Yeah, that's the ultimate goal of any type of research in the biomedical field. But I think you're right in the analogy you used about we're essentially solving puzzles. I think in things like engineering, maybe the pieces are a bit more static. In biology, it's like doing a puzzle, except all the pieces have a mind of their own, and you try to have to design really, really well thought of experiments to try and extract information to understand exactly what's happening.
And there's not only one answer to the puzzle. There's not just one fix, because then everyone's different as well. So you throw in that complication.
Exactly.
But you're never going to run out of problems to solve in your field of work.
Exactly.
So tell us about the path that led you to SAHMRI.
Around 2015, I got introduced to Professor John Hopwood, who's a very successful researcher in Adelaide, who has been working in the field of lysosomes from his career, and has taken from bench to bedside therapies that have literally cured childhood diseases of the lysosome, genetic diseases. And I had the pleasure of meeting him in 2015 and just being introduced to the lab atmosphere that was going on at SAHMRI. And around then, SAHMRI was pretty new as well. And then I decided to approach him for an internship within their group. And soon after that, I actually met my boss now, Tim Sargent, and we developed a relationship. We had common interests in understanding how a pathway called autophagy that we study at the moment, which is a cellular waste disposal pathway, is controlled. And I took up an honors project with him, and then followed a PhD also with him. And now I work for him as a postdoctoral researcher.
So what was it about talking to Professor Hopwood and Dr. Sargent about this area of work that made you decide, yeah, that's something I want to pursue, and that's kept you pursuing it all this time?
It's probably got something to do with the fact that the lysosomes, or let me first explain roughly what we study. We study a pathway that is cells use to eat parts of themselves and degrade unwanted organelles or damaged materials in a cell. So when these things go awry, you get buildup of unwanted, you get junk essentially building up in the cell. And this manifests in part in a variety of diseases, largely neurodegenerative. Defects in this also speed up the aging process. So what became quite obvious earlier on is that, if we can work out ways to target this process or make cells better at cleaning themselves, there could be a nice way to improve lifespan and human health.
Because in a nutshell, we know that autophagy relates closely to healthy aging and can provide an indicator of internally how well we're aging, essentially.
Correct.
And this could apply to the whole litany of areas in health, and not just in one parameter, but heart disease and dementia and just aging in general. So
Correct.
It could potentially be like a new frontier of health research.
Yes. So as opposed, I consider myself a researcher who studies a pathway, and it's so core and fundamental to biology that it seems to be implicated in a variety of diseases. So I don't really consider myself like a dementia researcher or a heart disease researcher, but rather...
You're looking at a core function.
Correct.
And what have you learned so far since 2015? Are there some relatively simple things that you can say that have been significant?
Yeah, probably. This happened during my PhD. We found that one of the toxic proteins that accumulates in the Alzheimer's disease brain, called tau, we found that defective autophagy actually leads to its accumulation. And we really, I think for us, really the proof in the pudding, we had a whole bunch of experiments that were indicating this, but it was really the nice thing to see this vesicle of what we call an autophagosome, and inside it, this nice fluorescent aggregate of essentially the inclusion that accumulates in the brain of people with Alzheimer's disease. So that was really probably one of the biggest standouts for me, especially early on.
So this is the sticky plaque that's been found to be present in the brains of everyone who has Alzheimer's, but it's not exactly the cause, but we know that it's part of the puzzle.
Definitely part of the puzzle, yeah.
Yeah. So what have been the challenges that have stood out about trying to establish your early career?
Probably the hardest aspect of being a young researcher is the fact that, everything's competitive. And you're going up against people, even in the ECR or early career researcher category, you can be going up against people who have just far more experience than you, even though you're sort of stratified or siloed into buckets of 0 to 10 years out. But you could be also putting grants up against people who have already worked in the industry for a while, done a PhD later, and now have entered a PhD, and they've also got 20 years worth of research and a huge track record to go with it. So it's hard to go up against other researchers with
more of a track record.
Correct. And to some extent, track record is a function of time. You need time to pass to accrue citations and show impact for your research. And I feel like sometimes the scales are tipped in the opposite direction, especially for younger researchers. I know there's systems in play to try and improve this bias, but it definitely still exists, especially in grant systems that are around projects, and you have to show feasibility and track record. But it's hard to do when you've only been in a PhD
it's like when
for
you're
a few years.
trying to go for your first job, and the job application says they only want people with experience, but you can't have possibly had any experience yet. And it's like, how do I get there?
Circular.
Having that foot in the door to bust it open so that you can then be able to refer to that study in future. Getting that first one or the first couple, tough to do, but obviously it is possible. How are you able to make that happen yourself?
I think in terms of either track record success or grant success that I've had is that we sort of changed the way we do things now. We go after big problems, and rather than try to do incremental science, we try to go after big problems where, if we solve this or if we make an advancement in this area, there are going to be big impacts.
Like very translatable.
Correct. Even if it's not necessarily translatable into a human outcome, in 5 years, or a lot of the basic or the cell biology that we do now, I think for a lot of the field, the impact will be coming in 20 years. But you really have to have that investment in discovery research to uncover brand new things. And I'll give you an example of something like this. So it's probably about 10 to 15 years ago now. There was a discovery about something called CRISPR, which is essentially gene editing. It was discovered as an innate immune system in bacteria. These are things that would never, ever get funded in Australia at the moment. But the impact from that 10, 15 years later now is that there are gene therapies that are literally in clinical trials. So it's not immediately obvious how, say, studying the innate immune system of bacteria can have a massive impact to human health. It can be, especially for the most impactful things, it could be difficult to anticipate their importance.
You don't know what the ripple effect is going to be. And then you have to be able to have the foresight and the patience to stick with it, knowing that you might not see that payoff for a decade or 2 decades.
Yeah, well, I guess the delayed gratification is a huge part of being a scientist anyway.
So with the first few grants that you went for, the first 5 years of your career, have you had to put up with some frustrations, some disappointments, some times where you really thought something was going to come off and it didn't?
All the time. Yes. Whether that is, paper submissions and doing revisions for trying to get a paper accepted, and then a reviewer comes back with more experiments, or working hard on an idea that you think is worth pursuing, but you do the experiments and it just doesn't seem that way. What you predicted was either untrue, or your experiment wasn't really geared to detect it properly.
And that's the majority of the time as a scientist.
Yeah. It's hard. We literally study things, especially in cell biology, that we can't necessarily see with our own eyes. We have to rely a lot on intuition and nice controls in our experiments to really get things going. But don't get me wrong, a lot of progress has been made.
And I suppose that sense of intuition and being able to trust your gut, that comes from having some success. So times in the past where you've thought, no, I think this is a good idea, I want to go after it, and then it leads somewhere,
Yep.
then that reaffirms, okay, I should be listening to myself when I have those thoughts. But that must get thrown a bit when you have a thought and an idea and you pursue it and it doesn't work out, and you take a lot of self-assuredness to think, no, it's not always going to work out, but I'm going to keep on backing myself and keep on exploring and not get downhearted when things don't work out.
Exactly. I try to be as objective as possible when I say design experiments, and I try not to sort of like put all my chips in, if you will, like, because unfortunately what can happen is if you're in love with an idea, or you can bias yourself into, only seeing
Trying to make it come true.
correct, or you can be unconsciously biased toward, only seeing the things that agree with your hypothesis, but not the 10 other things that completely refute it. So I guess my strategy is to be passive, but also very objective in how I go about science, and be very rigorous when it comes to analysis and the way to control experiments to be sure that what you're seeing is actually genuine and not just some fluke or some artifact that just might have crept into your experiment.
A huge part of your job is to try to prove yourself wrong on a continual basis.
Correct. That's the best science, is when you're onto something when you start designing those experiments. Well, if this is true, then when we do this experiment, this must work. This is how you sort of have deductive reasoning, and you sort of build progressive hypotheses. And it's great to see once you stumble onto something after a lot of failures, and you stumble onto something that is like robust and it like stands the test of time. You can test this concept in multiple different ways, and it always checks out. It's a great feeling. You're on the right track.
Well said. Has it affected you at all in terms of your personal traits? Like, do you feel like you've become a more patient man since taking up this occupation? Has it changed any of those things?
Patience is probably one. I'm definitely way more objective in the way I look at stuff. So, whether that's even like watching the news and stuff like that, I'm a lot more skeptical of, like, what might the motive of this news source be, or, this presenter.
Not taking things at face value.
Correct.
What potential opportunities do you think exist in the field of research that you're focusing on, that you're excited about? That big picture.
Big picture. I do. It's been great to see just how much Adelaide has started to foster a niche of like biomedical hub research over 10 years on the west end of the city. But really big picture, my vision is that a lot of the research around the autophagy field is going to start breaking through a bit more into clinical trials. We're slowly seeing this start happening now, but I think that a lack of important tools is really the bottleneck, and we are doing our best to try and relieve that.
So do you think we're going to get to a point where we can say with a simple test on a cellular level how well someone's aging, and then have clinicians be able to tailor interventions for them based off their own reading, and that being autophagy?
Almost certainly. Yeah. I think that's the ultimate vision of our research group that Tim has really pioneered. At some point, you're going to be going to the doctor. You're going to be doing a autophagy test at the same time that you get your cholesterol done. And this is going to be used to make inferences on, say, how you should eat or exercise and stuff like this.
What's the advantage of that going to be?
We think, based on animal work, improved health span and reduction in rates of age-related disease from experiments, particularly in mice and aging experiments. That would be my prediction.
Who in your personal life factors into the work that you do? Like, who are you thinking about? Is there someone that motivates your work when you have to bang your head against the wall and find another solution and keep working and going through the frustration?
I get a lot of support from my wife. We chat about these things. I'll tell her about my day. And just, yeah, so my family, I get a lot of support from, and they serve as an inspiration. My wife's not a biologist, but from moral support, I guess.
When your work's based on trying to help people to live longer and live healthier, do you have your parents in mind, your grandparents, your soon-to-be child?
Yeah. So I guess in that respect, yes, I always have that in the back of my mind. My parents are in the 60s, or dad's just turned 60. So anything that we can do now in this sort of late midlife that might improve their longevity is going to be really, really important. We've got a kid on the way, which is incredibly exciting. So it's going to be very interesting to see just how much the field advances over their life.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How does the excitement of becoming a dad compare to everything else?
They're not even comparable. I can't fathom just how excited we are to be parents. Completely different. Orders of magnitude more excited about becoming a dad.
Are you going to be able to step away and put stuff on pause even for a brief time to focus on something even more important?
I want to say yes, but I don't think so. I think even when I go on holiday, I'm always looking up papers and stuff like this. I think it's just part of who I am. I'm always sort of working in some regard. So I guess I'll do my best to pull back on that, but I'd be lying if I said that I'm going to stop.
But that's beautiful that you say it's part of what you are. It's not like a job that you don't enjoy that you can't get away from. It's like a enduring curiosity that never goes away.
I'm getting paid to do a hobby. That's the way I feel about it.
And that would be partly why you can be so good at it and stick at it for so long. And curiosity is just at the core of that, trying to answer questions, and there's always going to be another one.
Correct. Yeah. And there are lots of failures will creep up in your career in science, but yeah, you really got to be a curious person. And I think that sort of drives your motivation to ask new questions, experiment, try and troubleshoot. Why did this not work? And sort of pursue big ideas.
What does having a mentor like Tim do for your development? Because he's been there pretty much since day one, and he's a fair bit more experienced than you.
Yep.
How much does it help to have someone to work with like that?
Instrumental. Having a great mentor like Tim. Also have several other mentors, including one of my PhD supervisors, Professor Sharad Kumar. But just having somebody to talk to and bounce ideas forward and back with, and talk about, the challenges that, an everyday researcher faces, and, all the quirks in this sort of line of work. It really just sort of helps take a mental load off, and I think ultimately getting their ideas and their input has really, really shaped the success that I've had so far.
Just not doing it alone and doing it alongside people who have been where you've been before and can give you some advice on how to get through those stages, and you both help each other. Exactly.
I get a lot of our relationship, and I hope that they feel the same way.
they think you're all right. So what do you do to get space from work? Because like you said, your mind never really switches off. You're always thinking about what could come next. How do you get some space?
I like to catch up with friends. We like to, go to the pub. I don't know if you're allowed to say whether going to the pub is a hobby.
Yeah.
But I enjoy catching up with friends, going out for dinner.
Are your friends scientists? Do you talk about science much outside of work, or is it totally different?
My friends, with the exception of Dr. Andrew Shoebridge and Dr. Ryan Doig, a lot of my close friendship circle don't work in science. So they're constantly interested, but we tend to just speak about other things.
Yeah. Okay. That's always good.
It's a good outlet to separate.
Yeah. You don't have to explain the minutiae of all the minutiae.
It's actually quite useful because it really helps you distill, the importance of the research you do, because you need to be able to communicate it to your friends who didn't do a biology degree. Yeah.
Sounds like you've been listening to the media department's advice. So finally, when you look back on your career, what do you want to be able to say you were able to contribute?
I think probably that something I did made a difference. I realized that we do very complicated cell research that is still far from translation, but we need to plant these seeds. I would love that something that I discover has a direct impact on human health at some point. But I recognize that sometimes from the discovery phase all the way to the translation phase, that these are 20 plus year ventures.
Oh, well, you've got nothing but time.
I guess so.
Hopefully. I'm sure you'll do it, mate. You've got the determination and, most importantly, the curiosity and the relationships at SAHMRI to make that happen. So it's only a matter of time.
Yep.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
If you want to learn more about SAHMRI and the researchers working to build a brighter, healthier future for you and your family, head to samhri.org.au.